He thought it was just another school day, until the sound of the gavel sealed his fate. A black teenager, barely 17, was sentenced to life in prison for a crime he swore he didn't commit. The courtroom fell silent, but the silence wasn't justice. It was a verdict shaped by prejudice. Everyone turned to leave, convinced his story was over. But then came the words that stunned the judge, the jury, and the nation. "I'm calling my dad, the Attorney General." What unfolded next wasn't just about one boy. It revealed a painful truth about racism in America's justice system. Like and subscribe to Join Our Community. Darius Johnson was 17, a quiet kid who loved basketball, music, and spending weekends helping his little sister with homework. He wasn't perfect, no teenager is, but he stayed out of trouble, focused on finishing high school, and dreamed of being the first in his family to graduate from college. To his neighbors, though, he wasn't Darius the student, the son, or the big brother. To them, he was just another black boy walking the streets, a suspicion before he ever spoke a word. On the morning of his arrest, Darius had left home wearing his school hoodie and sneakers, carrying nothing but his backpack. By afternoon, police cars surrounded him, their flashing lights painting him guilty before a single question was asked. The accusation was swift, armed robbery. No evidence, no witnesses pointing to him, just a description that sounded close enough. In court, he sat trembling as the charges were read, staring at the floor while strangers whispered about him as if his fate had already been decided. For Darius, the world seemed to shrink to four walls, a wooden bench, and a judge who looked at him not as a child, but as a criminal. What Darius didn't realize was that this trial would never be about truth or fairness. It was about something far deeper, something woven into the system itself. The question wasn't whether he was guilty or innocent. It was whether society was ready to see him as human. The courtroom should have been a place of truth. But for Darius, it felt more like a stage, one where his skin color had already written the script. The prosecutor painted him as a menace, a dangerous young black man capable of anything. They waved photographs, none of which showed him. They cited witnesses, none of whom could describe his face. Yet every glance toward the jury reminded Darius of the battle he was truly fighting, not against evidence, but against perception. The defense attorney pointed out the holes in the case. No fingerprints, no video footage, a timeline that made no sense. Darius had been in class when the crime happened. Still, the judge's face remained stone cold as though logic had no place here. For every fact in Darius's favor, the prosecutor countered with a stereotype. His hoodie, his friends, his neighborhood. It wasn't evidence they leaned on. It was prejudice dressed as proof. When Darius's mother testified, tears streaming down her face, pleading for the court to see her son as the child he was, the room remained unmoved. To some, her words weren't the cries of a grieving mother. They were dismissed as excuses from a family protecting their own. The weight of centuries of bias pressed down in that moment, suffocating any chance of fairness. Day after day, Darius sat shackled, listening as his life was debated like it was nothing more than a legal puzzle. Teachers who had praised his work ethic were cross-examined. Their credibility chipped away because they didn't know what he was really capable of. Every detail of his young life was twisted, weaponized until the boy who once dreamed of college seemed unrecognizable, even to himself. And then came the turning point, the jury's faces. Some avoided his gaze entirely. Others stared at him with an unease that felt heavier than words. It wasn't the evidence that decided their expressions. It was something else, something far more dangerous. As the gavel slammed down, the verdict carried centuries of injustice with it. Guilty. A teenager's life was erased in seconds, replaced by a sentence that echoed louder than any courtroom could contain: life in prison. But just as the silence settled and the air thickened with finality, Darius lifted his head. His voice was quiet, almost breaking, but every word pierced the air. "I'm calling my dad, the Attorney General." The room froze. For the first time in the entire trial, the balance of power shifted, and what happened next would shake everyone to their core. The judge's gavel still echoed when Darius's words cut through the silence. "I'm calling my dad, the Attorney General." Gasps rippled across the courtroom. Some smirked in disbelief, others shifted uncomfortably. To them, it sounded like desperation, the final plea of a boy who had just lost everything. But Darius wasn't bluffing. His father, a man who had fought for justice his entire career, was now watching the system strip his own son of it. Within hours, phones buzzed, cameras turned, and reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Suddenly, this wasn't just a case about a teenager. It was a case about what America chooses to see when it looks at young black men. The headlines weren't about evidence or innocence. They were about race, power, and the question no one wanted to confront. How many others had been sentenced without a voice to defend them? But inside the courtroom, the reaction was colder. The prosecutor scoffed, whispering that even the attorney general can't erase the facts. The jury avoided eye contact, clinging to their verdict as if changing it would unravel their own beliefs. And the judge, his face stiffened, not with regret, but with defiance. In that room, it was clear they hadn't just judged Darius. They had judged every black child who ever dared to believe the system would protect them. Darius sat shackled, his wrists burning, as cameras flashed and voices shouted his name. He was no longer invisible, but visibility came with a price. He wasn't a teenager anymore, he was a symbol. And in that moment, one chilling truth became clear. Even with power on his side, the fight for justice was only beginning. Because if a judge could sentence the Attorney General's son without proof, what hope did any other black boy have? The headlines spread like wildfire. Attorney General's son sentenced to life without evidence. For weeks, the nation argued. Some claimed it was proof of corruption. Others insisted it revealed something far deeper, that even power and privilege couldn't shield a black teenager from the grip of prejudice. Behind the noise, Darius sat in a cell, his childhood stolen, his dreams buried beneath the weight of a system designed to break him. His father launched appeals, investigations, and public statements, but the damage was already done. The sentence wasn't just against one boy, it was a verdict on an entire community that had been shouting for decades, begging to be heard. Darius became a symbol not because he wanted to, but because America forced him to be. And the world began to ask, if this could happen to the son of the Attorney General, how many nameless, faceless young black men had disappeared into prisons without a whisper of justice? How many mothers had cried in silence, their voices drowned out by a system too blind to see their children as human? For Darius, the scars will never fade. No appeal, no press coverage, no apology can return the years stolen from him. But his story, painful as it is, forces us to confront a truth too many try to ignore. Racism isn't just in words or actions. It's written into the structures that decide who is guilty, who is free, and who gets to dream. So the question lingers. How many more lives will be destroyed before change is more than a promise? How many more children will we allow the system to erase before we decide that justice, real justice, belongs to everyone? If this story touched you, don't just watch, be part of the change. Hit subscribe and join our community of voices that matter.